It's an expression of concerned citizens who have been observing, discussing, analyzing the situation in our country, particularly at this time. Secondly, this is not a resolution. It is a proposal to the nation to begin, as Rick said earlier on, as a conversation, a national conversation, in the hope that there's a buy-in to the idea, to the vision and the idea of an NTA, National Transitional Authority. Again, these signatories are not members of the NTA or proposed members of the NTA. We are merely facilitators. We have ideas as to the kind of people who should be in the NTA. Clearly, people are non-partisan. And if, as facilitators, we are seen as being partisan, we don't qualify. But people are non-partisan, people of repute, people who have no ambition to become politicians, people who just want to facilitate, to see the country through a transitional period during which reforms, political and economic reforms, are undertaken before the next elections. And therefore, what has prompted this is obvious. The conditions, the economic and political conditions in our country are in dire straits. We are on the edge, on the precipice. Anything can happen. And we feel that in such circumstances, we need to preempt desperate actions on the part of the state, the ruling party, political parties, any group who might want to run away with it. And therefore, including the calls for elections, we feel there should be no elections until a reform agenda is put in place. We argue in the document against the ideas of a GNU. We have had the experience of that. The reform agenda is forgotten in the process, and we feel that this offers an opportunity for us, all of us as Zimbabweans, to engage in a conversation and perhaps improve on our proposal. And in preempting desperate actions at home, we also want to preempt desperate actions outside, in the region, in the world at large. We are concerned about global factors who are more interested in stability, by inverted commas, than democratic processes. We are concerned about persons at home and abroad. We are concerned about succession at any rate, without the need for reform. These are very desperate times, but also offer the opportunity to think out of the box, to save our country from violent conflagration, loss of life. And this, in our view, offers the chance of peaceful transition. That's it. I don't know, my colleagues, Briggs Bomba, Tony Rila. We are sorry that others are not able to come. Some of our members are abroad, they live outside the country. But we're here with their concurrence.
So just to point out the two documents you have in front of you, one is the press statement. You've seen references to that in other newspapers. It's been out a bit. And that explains in more general terms why we are launching this initiative. The second one is the position paper. And as you'll see, the position paper takes you through very brief analyses of various events. We don't believe that we have to produce you a 60-page monograph of what the ills of Zimbabwe are. I think all Zimbabweans understand those really very, very deeply. We point out in it that any NTA must be guided by a vision, and we offer a very brief vision, which we think is very similar to the kinds of vision statements that have been made by other bodies, for example, the churches and the Zimbabwe we want. And then we outline some reasons why we think this particular solution is more likely to lead us to a new and stable Zimbabwe. And as Dr. Mandaza has pointed out, we have little faith that elections without substantial reforms will lead to any kind of changed state or resolve the problems. As he pointed out, we also do not believe that a government of national unity will take us forward. Government of national unity has political parties in it, and as we saw in the previous government of national unity, led to no reform of the state. So we don't believe a government of national unity, people by the political parties, will be a solution. You will also see that there have been calls for national transitional authorities already by NDCT, by PDP. I think Crisis Coalition and at least 2 other groups have made reference to an NTA. As neutral citizens, we believe the only way forward is for a highly neutral body that is not people by political parties, but is people by non-partisan national figures capable of taking us through a period of reform and to genuine elections. And in that process, the political parties will be political parties and wait for the outcome of that election. And in part, the reason we pose that is that we believe in the end an election must lead to legitimacy and the state of Zimbabwe being recognized by the entire international community. It's not a question of who, it's a question of how. What we need is a reformed Zimbabwe and a government in which the international community has confidence in taking us forward.
Well, very little to add. I think the only thing is to emphasize that this is a humble submission by concerned citizens who are calling for a national conversation on the whole idea of a National Transitional Authority as an instrument that can help this country avoid falling over the edge of a cliff, as Dr. Mandaza alluded to earlier. So the call is really for a conversation to start happening within the different sectors in business, civil society, political parties, media. The generality of Zimbabweans has to start to engage with the idea of a National Transitional Authority and come, to their own conclusions. The basic point that is being made here is that this can give the country a breathing room so that by the time we get to the elections, whenever they are called, you have a neutral authority that has created conditions for an election that won't be disputed. You have created conditions for a free and fair election, but also you have an authority that has alleviated the pain in terms of livelihoods that people are going through at the present moment. And we believe that various other mechanisms that are being proposed do not have the capacity, the same capacity that the NTA would have in terms of creating such a space for this country. So really, the call is for a national conversation to start, and we see where that ends. And the last thing that I'll probably make reference to is that some of you who've been following conversations online will probably have seen Professor Jonathan Moyo's concern that this might be an attempt to subvert a constitutionally elected government. So if you refer to the structure that we have here as a proposed structure for the NTA, right at the top is the constitution of this country. So if we were to come to a resolution as Zimbabweans that we do want to move forward with the idea of the NTA, everything will be done according to the constitution of this country. The same way that we amended the constitution and created an office of a prime minister, created a legislation that allowed for a government of national unity to be put in place the last time in 2008, will be the same way that these things will be done. So really the call is for a national conversation and within those different sectors, and let's see what Zimbabweans say about the idea. Thank you.
Let's see what the media says about it. We welcome the media because we think that the media provides a useful agency through which to get this out to the nation and to begin the conversation.
Over to you. Questions, comments?
Supportive. Yes.
Yeah. My first question with regard to, I realize that most of you, those who are signatories to this document, are scholars. Maybe if you could give us an overview, a model, a base model that you've seen that is worked of an NTA that can make in the context of Zimbabwe. And then second, I would like to know how you intend to convince the ruling party towards this idea, considering that they say the mandate given to them by the constitution, and also the fact that they won the 2013 election. Are you going to involve such a, how are you going to convince them? By what means are you going to convince those who are you out to accept this kind of an arrangement?
In terms of precedence of NTAs, in Europe we have seen the Italian model. What is its name?
Technical Transitional Authority.
Yeah. The Italians, about 2-3 years ago, they brought someone from the EU, became the head of that transition, mainly made up of technocrats. In the region, South Africa had one. I think Tony can speak to it just now. With respect to the reaction of the ruling party, we're not surprised the kind of reactions that we're getting, knee-jerk reactions to this idea. But as Briggs has explained, there's nothing unconstitutional, or there will be nothing unconstitutional in an NTA, given that you can see Parliament is quite central in that thing. I would say many in the ruling party in the state might find refuge in an NTA when things get rough, as they are already. The NTA might preempt the high possibility of factionalism becoming violent within the ruling party. And I would say that if I were in the ruling party in such circumstances, I'd look forward to this kind of thing as a possible way out of it. And certainly that's our attitude, that really things are getting very, very dangerous in our country. And you might be cynical and say, well, let them finish one another. But as we have seen in other situations, these things spill over, and innocent bystanders are affected. Not to mention the tendency in politics to mobilize widely in furthering your cause and using people your age group as cannon fodder in violent confrontations. Here's in today's event a good example of that, where people are mobilized 3 a.m. in the morning in one direction, tomorrow in another direction. We have to find a way of pacifying our country, healing.
Your question about models, I think you'll see, if you look at these examples, particularly since 1990, that many of the transitional authorities emerge out of blunt civil war. You know, their arrangements as a peace treaty. The one that I think sticks in our mind most of all is the Cadessa process that led to a new South Africa. And that was a very important process, but we believe it's slightly different to our situation. The Cadessa process was essentially a deal cut between political parties to stop them going into, or to stop a civil war. And that was a body constructed by representation of political parties in what was called the Transitional Executive Council. Now, a critical element of CODESA was that the National Party in South Africa quite clearly accepted it was not going to be the next government of South Africa. You know, in a one man, one vote election in South Africa in 1994, there was no way that the majority party would not be a black party representing the majority of South Africans. So one party to that group had already accepted that they would move out of political power, and the whole process of CODESA was negotiating the kinds of conditions thereafter. I think our problem is that we have political parties that are not willing to concede losing. That's part of the problem that bedevils us. And it's for that reason that we believe that a GPA wouldn't work, and it's for that reason that we believe a National Transitional Authority must be a wholly neutral body. We fully admit that this is a novel experiment in the world, and you have to admit also that Zimbabwe is a kind of unique example of all kinds of political processes in the world. It's a unique case. So what we're posing is not necessarily a question of have we to persuade a particular group. Our task is to persuade the populace as a whole, as Dr. Mandaza said. This is about the citizens being involved in the process. And this has not been part of the previous pact. The GPA, for example, was an elite pact between political parties. Citizens were not consulted. So we believe that this must be a conversation, as my colleagues are pointing out, with the widest possible base, and in which the citizens have a very strong voice in how this may come out. And therefore, this is the beginning of a process. We also believe, and you'll see, we're alluding to the fact that we believe this is an urgent process. This is not something that can take a very long time. I think all of us will be aware that the prospect of domestic collapse looks imminent. I'm no economist, and we don't really know all the facts and the details, but it does appear that the country is sliding into a very serious economic collapse. And therefore, we don't have time to waste.
Yeah, and just to add that we believe that if there is a national chorus from all the critical sectors above partisan considerations, so from civil society, from the movements that you're seeing protesting on the ground, to business, and beyond the nation, the region as well, South Africa, because if things do collapse here, they will spill over into the region. So we believe that even in South Africa, the Southern African Development Community, there needs to be that chorus that says, this is an option for Zimbabwe to avoid falling over the cliff. And even beyond that, in terms of the international community, but also within the different social forces that support the ruling party itself, we believe that it is in their interest to seriously engage with this idea of a National Transitional Authority as a breathing space for this country. So we'd expect that the war veterans, the war collaborators, the ex-detainees, everyone gives serious consideration and engages seriously with the idea, adjust it as they say fit, but engage it on its merits as an option to avoid serious chaos in this country.
Any names that would suggest as possible members of the NTA?
No, we have some names, but that's individual names that we have, people of, but I think these must come from yourselves.
How will that be done?
If we take you to, if you look at the document, we provided some principles of what we thought were important. At this point, I think it's preemptive to say who. What is important in the first stage is to understand that, or to get consensus that this is a sensible way forward. And there are many mechanisms, and actually we're fortunate to have a constitution that allows us to do many, many things. But you'll see one of the principles we point out, that the members of the NTA will be selected according to agreed criteria and procedures, and amongst the candidates put forward to an independent body selected from amongst the churches and other kinds of bodies. So there needs to be a mechanism put in place. We think it's presumptuous at this particular time to say what that mechanism should be and who those names are without a wider consultation with the nation, and particularly the citizens. We point in this that one of the things we believe is that the citizens as a whole have really lost faith in political parties and leaders. So I think it's a very risky business to say, we think this is the right leader. We really need to have some sense of what comes from people, and people through the kinds of constituencies that represent them, which would include political parties, obviously.
Now, such people will have to be invited. I don't think it's something that, it's not a political office, or it's not a job that you have to persuade people, say, well, I think you're a suitable person given your reputation. Could you,
Thank you. It's Nangarembwa, Institute of Creative Arts for Progress in Africa. Thank you very much for this initiative. I came late, so I hope I'm not asking a question that's already been asked. Just having looked at this briefly, it seems to me that this document is very much concerned with power and how we are going to transition power. From somebody coming from the cultural sector, I'm very concerned about society and people and psyches. We have the organ for national healing at the moment, but I don't see that such issues are foregrounded at all. Do you think you're talking about another government of national unity not actually affecting any change? Do you think that we can affect any change in Zimbabwe without engaging with people at that level? My concern is that if we put the same contents into an NTA, we will get the same results.
Absolutely agree with you. I think one of the important things about, assume we can get to that particular point, there must be enabling legislation, and that enabling legislation will have to determine the tasks of a National Transitional Authority. Now, it obviously has to be a short process. We can't subvert the electoral process and the Constitution completely. And within that, what hopefully what comes out of the discussions are the kinds of points that you're raising. What are the issues about national healing? How are we going to deal with the trauma and the violence? I think the point we want to make is that the process of a new Zimbabwe is a transformative process. We're stuck there, and we need to transform to a new Zimbabwe. An NTA can't do that all. What it can do is begin a transformative process that carries on in a new government, and a government that has legitimacy and the support of the people and is not a disputed government. But within that, whatever it will be, National Transitional Authority Bill, or whatever it will be called, must be laid out a series of critical things that must be addressed within that time. That enables you to go from its inception to the point an election happens, and then it's handed over to a new government. I think if one looks at it, and one of the points we make about the needs for reforms, is one of the points we make is that constitutionalism is a fundamental prerequisite for a future. And that means that our constitution is not a loose leaf folder that when you don't like it, you just tear it out. It means that we stick to it. And in many ways, our constitution will guarantee transformation with an executive authority and a government that's willing to respect that in all its ways. The National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, the independent institutions, all of these things can transform Zimbabwe. Our concern is, how do we get to that particular point? And what would be the mechanism? And this is the mechanism we propose.
Thank you. Can I follow on from that? I agree with you entirely. But how meaningful do you think the concept of a constitution is in a country like Zimbabwe? My assessment of the situation is that the constitution is just seen like any other means to power. How does one engage with the whole concept of constitutionalism in a country like ours?
What are you suggesting? A stateless society?
No, not at all. I'm sorry that you would have thought I would be suggesting that. What I'm saying is that when I look at the way people engage with the Constitution in a country like ours, I do not see them engaging with it in the way of constitutionalism. Now, this to me appears to be de facto on the ground. So, I hear the NTA saying that they want constitutionalism in an environment where it doesn't exist. So I'm just wondering what mechanisms and systems you have in place to ensure that?
I don't think we're proposing a set of general views without the detail in it. We think it's presumptuous that somebody would launch this thing as a fait accompli, does the complete detail implemented. You know, we want this discussion to be wide. I think what's very important in a transitional process is to inculcate and make bedrock the principles of constitutionalism. It's clearly going to be one of their major tasks, is to ensure that constitution is obeyed. I think constitutions matter enormously to Zimbabwe, and they have for 18 years now. It's a very important thing to citizens that we have a constitution and that the constitution is adhered to. We see many reasons why, many occasions in which constitutionalism is not adhered to in the way laws are drafted to largely violate the constitution. But that's part of that transformative process, so that citizens will know that, for example, the Bill of Rights is a serious part of the Constitution, and they can stand up for that. And that all the bits of legislation that exist by which the state operates will operate completely and clearly according to the Constitution. So there's an enormous reform. I don't think we underestimate how difficult this task is. All we're saying essentially, I think, is that, as we keep saying, we're on the precipice. If things get much worse, it is a very difficult thing to recover. Those of you who are political scientists will know that failed states are a desperately serious problem. It's very hard to come back from that. And that's the reason why we're saying there's no reason to get to that point. Citizens as a whole can adopt a different mechanism, and that mechanism can be transformative and lead us into a new Zimbabwe.
So in terms of implementing this initiative, where are you going from now?
We're spreading.
What processes are you going to take?
No, at this stage, we're just putting it to the nation. The people as a whole will decide how it evolves. It's a proposal by a group of concerned citizens. Only a proposal, as I said at the beginning of this meeting. We hope that it can gather momentum on the back of civic bodies like yourselves, media, trade unions, churches. Churches have been one of our major agency for obvious reasons, because they constitute among the most neutral in general, and they have already made some very critical statements about the condition that we find ourselves in. The statement which came out a few days ago is very strong, and we are working very closely with them. Some of the clergy are part of this group that you see from the names.
But the task is for you.
What can other...
It's your discussion. You need to roll it out to everybody.
Yeah.
And the point about a platform is that each of us represents ourselves. And we will talk to whoever we talk to individually in our particular group. And we just want to see this thing snowball out and a discussion happen. There is no center to it until there is the energy for it. Then there will be a center, but there is no center for it now. It is merely a discussion.
What would you like other civic groups to do who want to assist with this initiative? We have the media here,
Yeah.
not exactly media, but I have a constituency, for example. So how can we know what you need from us?
We're not in charge of anything. What we're saying is, if it makes sense, go and talk to your people, whoever they are, your families, the groups that you represent. It will be amazing when there's a large discussion going on everywhere that this word happens. We certainly are not arrogant enough to believe that in our platform we have the answers. The answers will come from a national conversation. And there are an enormous number of very wise people, old and young, male and female out there, that can contribute to this. We believe that what really has gone wrong in the solutions is the lack of voice of the citizens except as voters. And we're asking citizens to be more than voters. We're asking citizens to be active and frame their future and frame a step to a new Zimbabwe. So we're not owning it. We spread it out there. each of us individually will be very happy to talk about it in all sorts of different ways, but if the PCC is not going to be a place that you can come and say solve all our problems, because we most certainly can't.
So what next after this presentation? Is there like a big meeting involving everyone, or this NTC some pie in the sky, just a concept that will...
We'll see. We'll see whether this idea has traction.
We'll see what the media says.
Yeah,
In the first instance.
Yeah, I mean, the hope is that, you know, the conversation starts now with different civic groups so people can share this. We are now in this hashtag era, so we hope people can start, you know, hashtagging it, talking about it openly, you know, in terms of criticizing it. We've already started to see some of those conversations are taking place, and then that will guide the evolution of this process. It's quite foreseeable that you might get to a point where, you know, beyond talking about it, people start to make a strong call for it. So you start to have your activists that are already protesting on the streets saying, look, one of our demands is that there must be a National Transitional Authority to carry us as a bridge that carries us over, you know, to a different or a new Zimbabwe. You start to have your labor also making the same call. So those are things that are foreseeable, but I think the very first thing is for a conversation to happen, people to share this, circulate it widely, talk about it. The platform of concerned citizens will be reconvening in a few weeks' time to also just look at how the conversation is evolving and you know, what needs to be done in terms of moving this process forward.
To add to that, you know, I see two conversations going on. One that's very muted, and it's something around the Zimbabwe we want. It's a positive vision. I see an enormous amount of action out there, which is largely about the Zimbabwe we don't want. I think that's behind a lot of what's going on. We don't want this, we don't want bond notes, we don't want this, we don't want that. It's important, but it's a negative campaign. I think what this might add to it is a way in which you can go from one to the other. And I think the reason why we put this out is I think there needs to be a positive vision about something that we can actually struggle for and achieve, rather than merely have our energies in largely negative ways. This is not to be condemning of anything, but I think there needs to be a positive voice out there, and a positive direction, and a goal.
I should make a point that when we began talking about the NTA, some of us, you may have seen an article I wrote in April. It was the idea that the NTA would kick in once the government had collapsed. That can happen still. But the idea behind this is that the NTA model becomes a transitional model in itself. That you can begin pushing for it even before the government collapses, even before bloodletting has started. That you want to actually stop the bloodletting. I think the attitude in the region in particular is to say, look, we are tired of Zimbabwe, let's see what happens. And when there's bloodshed, then we will decide what to do. I think that's a cynical way of looking at it. Do we have to wait for bloodshed? Do we have the opportunity to stop bloodshed? To preempt? That's the point. And this is an effort, a proposal towards that.
Maybe we can start to narrate down.
Yeah.
In one of their meetings, the Labour made reference to the fact that the Zimbabwean story, there is need for the Zimbabwean story to be taken back to SADC and convince the region that Zimbabwe is in a crisis. Do you share the same view?
We share that view, but I also know that the region has no capacity to assist us. Zimbabweans must help themselves. We know, as students of the region, we are founders of SADC, that the region is lacking in capacity to do anything. I was at the Maputo summit in 2013, which summit should have stopped an election which was, by all standards, bound to be a sham. They were unable to. Remember, Mugabe threatened to leave SADC, and they all blocked. So I don't think they have capacity. They have capacity to assist us in a direction, but I don't think they can initiate. That's clear. They've been very, very quiet for the last 3 years. And likewise, the globe. I think we need to look after our own thing, and I hope for support. And as I said earlier on, that some of the global factors are in a hurry to see stability for its own sake. And as we say in our document, we're against successionists. And we make a point about the war veterans statement, the way they are saying that they want someone to succeed. We say, look, succession either in any party or in the ruling party is not a solution at this stage. We simply have to get a process of reform, political and economic reform. And you realize we are stuck now on both fronts.
More questions, comments? Then, on behalf of the PCC, we want to thank you very much for coming.